If that's not creepy enough, Dickens was also obsessed with sketches and imagery of the living eating the dead. Yeah. Authors are an interesting lot, and some are a wee bit more strange than others. In fact, there actually are some famous authors who are really strange. And actually, big shout out to my boy Dan Norton. He actually does the video editing here for this channel. Here, pop up your picture there, Dan. Dan actually had sent me this article by Grunge.com where they actually covered 11 famous authors who were really particularly strange. So I thought we'd just go ahead and take a look at some of these strange authors. We started out with Bram Stoker, actually the author of Dracula. You know, he was the godfather of all things horror and vampire writing. So, you know, those that actually wrote Twilight probably can thank Bram Stoker. But anyway, he was a royal conspiracy theorist, and he had this belief that the Queen was in fact a man, and he just judged it by the fact that, you know, the Queen looked particularly masculine and had a lot of makeup. His belief was when the Queen was born, the baby actually ended up dying, and so rather than angering the king or something to that matter, they found the nearest child that was, you know, could pass as, you know, a girl. And they're like, hey, here we go. There's the Queen. She's okay. He was weirdly concerned, as this article says, what's under the dress. I can only imagine if Bram was actually that type of a person making those type of claims these days. Can you imagine if he was just tweeting out, you know, the Queen is a man? You know, you can only imagine cancel culture would eat him up, and he probably is not going to be the only one on this list we're going to mention that cancel culture would just completely eat him up. The Marquis de Sade, depravity, deviance, and a loving marriage. He was pretty much like the 50 Shades of Grey author back before obviously she had existed. Yeah, he had some freaky stuff. In fact, a lot of his, you know, existence was buried by the family up until the 1940s, and even France actually banned his work all the way up to 1957. It wasn't just his works that were freaky. You know, he had a lot of really weird kinks, including like pretty much kidnapping and torturing people, and he would pay them off to kind of, you know, give them hush money and say, okay, you know, you weren't here. He imprisoned a prostitute and stomped on a crucifix while yelling a combination of blasphemies and orders to whip him. Yeah, and he was the one doing the whipping. Weird. And he and his wife actually shared this same kink, and they actually had ended up kidnapping and doing the same thing to a group of, you know, 4 women, 1 guy. And yeah, they were definitely a strange lot. Agatha Christie, now she's world renowned for her mystery books. She actually had a mysterious disappearance. Now, this is something that I found very interesting in that, you know, she had a random disappearance in 1926. She went and, you know, lied her daughter down for the night, kissed her, said goodnight, headed on out to her car, and never came back. And this was like, she's gone for a while, and they even brought in some of her other author friends, including Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who we'll get to here in a minute, and Dorothy L. Sayers to help in the investigation. They brought in thousands of police officers to find her, and they finally go and they find her out in Harrogate. And she had checked into a hotel somewhere, and she just had no recollection of like, hey, I don't remember what's happening. But when they went to check out the hotel registry, she checked in under her husband's mistress name. Yeah, so her husband had a mistress. She checked in under that name in that hotel and was like, how I got here? Well, later on down the line, she ends up getting divorced from her husband. Wait, one of the, probably the only ones on here that actually still alive, Ray Bradbury, author of Fahrenheit 4, that's easy for me to say, 451, and The Martian Chronicles. It's very interesting that this gentleman that actually wrote The Martian Chronicles, something that's a bit more sci-fi laden, is a technophobe, someone who just pretty much is just out and out against it. He had actually had some scarring childhood trauma to where he actually had witnessed a very vicious, you know, car accident, and it got him to where he was freaked out of cars, so much so that he would almost always lean in favor of flying in planes. Now, I'm going to say this, that any opportunity that I see that I'm going to have to travel more than a few hours, I typically go and take a plane. So I'm not going to completely, you know, hate him for that one. He was actually asked in an interview about his hatred for computers and the internet after claiming computers were flim-flam. Yeah, see, it's flim-flam. Like, what is that? Like 1920s, like, verbiage? Flim-flam. I think I'm gonna start using that. Flim-flam. But at any rate, he went on to explain that it doesn't give most people anything more than they already have. It's all meaningless. An interviewer kind of pointed out, like, you kind of need computer and internet, don't you? And he said this: I have no time for that. Ray's probably the least strange of this lot. I mean, he just doesn't like technology, so I don't know. Grunge probably kind of threw him in. I mean, he doesn't belong in the same category as some of these folks that were just out there in left field. And speaking of left field, Virginia Woolf is actually an interesting one here. And I was already kind of speaking about cancel culture. I would say that right away you could see the title of this is pacifism and blackface. I don't want to make light of anybody that has any type of a mental disorder, and especially back in the day when there was no appropriate treatments or medication or any kind of guidance, because back then their treatment for Virginia was extracting her teeth because they believed that it would remove the infection, her mental illness. But the most notable part of this was the fact that she got together with a few friends. They got dressed up in robes, beards, and blackface. They approached the Royal Navy, and they essentially were masquerading about as Abyssinian princes, and they managed to get a 45-minute tour of the pride of the British Navy, the HMS Dreadnought. Now, you're probably saying, okay, what does that mean? Like, if we were to kind of put it in today's standard, according to Grunge, that would be like them getting the chance to use the Mars rover, because they were masquerading as princes, so they managed to kind of fool their way onto there while using blackface. Yeah. Now, here's another one that's, I would say, not quite as offensive to me, and I don't know. I don't know that this is necessarily strange, being very much deeply entrenched in spiritualism and sometimes something that might be a bit more metaphysical. I'd say there's stranger things out there, but Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was considered the mad spiritualist. Some of the spiritualism that his father was handing down to him was essentially like science. And so, I mean, obviously he was raised by this, but it started to kind of turn into more of a morbid curiosity for the occult. Fun fact, actually, in this article, I did not know that Sir Arthur Conan Doyle was actually friends with Harry Houdini. And they actually kind of got at odds at one point or other, because Doyle wanted to convince the world famous magician and illusionist Houdini that, like, hey, this stuff's legit. Let me take you to a seance and I'm going to have you talk to your mom. And like Houdini's like, okay, we'll give it a shot. And when the person that was conducting the seance started speaking in English, like he was his mother speaking in English, he was like, yeah, my mom didn't speak any English. And after that specific incident, Houdini was like, screw this, Doyle, I'm out of here. You can go ahead, take Sherlock Holmes and all your other stuff and stick it where the sun don't shine. The funny thing that this made me chuckle a little bit was that Doyle believed 100% in the illusionist and the magician. Everything that he was doing was 100% legit and not necessarily a worked craft. And hey, I understand that sometimes I really enjoy magic, and I'm not going to hate him for that, but I do know that it is a craft that requires lots of practice to give the illusion that it is 100% real. Charles Dickens. Oh my gosh, yeah, The Tale of Two Cities, The Tale of Two Corpses in this specific instance. He had this really weird attraction to repulsion. Like, he, for some reason, liked to see corpses, and he became so obsessed with that he had like these nightmares and hallucinations about the dead. And of course, in this article, it says, as if that's not creepy enough, Dickens was also obsessed with sketches and imagery of the living eating the dead. Yeah. I really can't add anything else to this. Charles Dickens was a weird cat. He was a great author, obviously, but good Lord. T.S. Eliot, cosmetics obsession. Now, I'm not going to shame anybody if they want to wear makeup. I mean, you see the likes of someone like, say, James Charles is world, famous for, putting on makeup and such. And he does it quite well, obviously. And there's a lot of men that will put makeup on, and that's not so weird to me. I don't know. I guess I don't put makeup on myself, obviously, you can see. But for him, he kind of took it into like a weird obsession to where T.S. Eliot would put on just like weird, it would almost make him look green, almost like he was very corpse-ish. And, you know, maybe Charles Dickens probably would have been fascinated with T.S. Eliot. And, you know, the funny thing is, when Virginia Woolf, okay, yeah, you remember blackface Virginia Woolf, the one with the mental illnesses? She was actually a friend with T.S. Eliot. She was kind of like, that's weird. Okay, so when, you know, someone that actually has some weird type tics looks over at you and goes, that's weird, you know, you got some issues here. And, you know, it wasn't that necessarily the fact that he was put on makeup, it was just that it looked odd. Like, it was like, oh, and he did it purposely so. It wasn't like, you know, they had to have a confrontation with him and sit down and be like, dude, you really need to kind of learn how to do that right. No, he was like, I want to look this way. I like to look like I'm plagued with depression and issues. Truman Capote had maniacal superstitions. You know, he had some hang up with the number 13. And it was almost like 13th month, and if he was walking 13 steps, he would take a leap and hop. I'm not gonna, this is another one of those ones that, yeah, it might be strange to us, but, you know, it's very possible that he had OCD. He had a mental illness that, you know, got him to hang up on things like this. And there was other things like, for instance, like, you know, if he was smoking, he would see that there was 2 cigarette butts inside the ashtray. He'd have to empty it out first before he would put in, because he never wanted to have 3 cigarette butts inside an ashtray. It was just like the number was always off to him. And like, I don't know, that seems rather clean rather than obsessed. Like, you know, I can't fault him on that one. So maniacal superstitions, I'm not going to fault this guy for that. Philip K. Dick, Visions of Ancient Rome. Now, Philip K. Dick is world famous for Do Androids Dream of Electric Sheep, otherwise known as Blade Runner, probably one of my more favorite movies from my childhood with Harrison Ford. He actually went and got some dental surgery in 1974, and when he was recovering, he started seeing like these weird flashes of light, and it morphed into visions of abstract paintings and engineering blueprints. And he was convinced the pink light he was seeing was allowing him to see cosmic truth. And it was the world around him was ancient Rome. Yeah, so he was pretty much like just tripping out. Like, he's like, oh man, I'm tripping balls. Oh, wow. Haha, Spartacus, what's going on, man? And during this time, what is referred to as, he called his divine madness, he'd actually written a book, 8,000 pages long. Now think about that, 8,000 pages. I want you to look probably at some of the most prolific authors, you know, probably with the exception of someone like, say, Stephen King, who probably spent, you know, decades putting together a back catalog of 8,000 pages or more. I mean, it could be more than that, but it took him a long time probably. This guy goes and writes an entire 8,000 page book during his divine madness. So that right there is pretty strange. And to round out this list is P.L. Travers. Now, I didn't know who this was initially. This actually was the original author of the children's book and movie, as some of you are familiar with Julie Andrews, Mary Poppins. And that's another great one from my childhood. Just love it. I mean, I can even think of Spoonful of Sugar right now. And she was kind of an odd person, you know, had a different type of an upbringing. But the part that actually is the most interesting was that she really was kind of like Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, believed a lot in the metaphysical and the spiritual type stuff, and she relied a lot on some mystics, gurus, sages, and arcane philosophies. When she went to adopt, she found someone that actually had twins. But because she was actually told by this specific astrologer that she could only have one twin, not both of them, she can only have one twin, she actually had to pick one. The problem is that since these twins were separated, she never told her child about, hey, you got a twin, until like just one day at 17 years old. Hey, what's going on? How's it going? You look like me. That's crazy. Are we twins? And yeah, the boys were pretty devastated, and especially because of this lifelong separation and being lied to the entire time. And You know, eventually they became alcoholics and died young. Yeah, that's how Grunge.com finishes out this piece. What do you think about some of these strange authors, these 11 ones? Have you ever heard of anything stranger than some of these? And I'd like to know what your take is on some of them. And speaking of authors, I did a video once about the 10 famous authors who were self-published, that they published their own works. Actually, it's in this very next video right here. You can take a look at that. You're gonna find it very fascinating. And the number one spot, you are not going to believe. And it's actually one of the authors I briefly mentioned in this. So I'll see you in this next one. Yeah, see, it's Flim Flam.